The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Let's Learn Live Virtual Summit. My name is Caitlin Oswald with Columbus, and today we have a special presentation for you on cybersecurity. Is your Dynamics GP system safe? We started the call by muting everyone, so if you have any questions during today's presentation, please feel free to use the question box feature located on the dashboard on the right-hand side of the screen. We will have some time for Q&A with your presenter throughout the webinar today, and where we will be covering all the questions that were submitted. Finally, we are recording this session and we'll be uploading it to our website if you ever want to go back and reference anything that you've learned today. And now I'm excited to introduce your presenter today, Kevin Dwyer.
Yeah, hi, good morning, everyone. Caitlin, I assume you can hear me, and I assume that means everyone else can hear me.
Yes, you are good to go.
Great. Well, first of all, everybody, thank you for taking some time out of your day to join us today. This is an important topic for businesses these days, and I think you're going to get a lot of value out of this session. So I really appreciate you coming here and exploring this subject matter with me. We'll start with our agenda. Pretty straightforward. We'll do a little housekeeping out of the gate. We'll go over how to ask questions and how to download the presentation. Then we're going to get into talking about why security is important. So it seems an obvious question, maybe, but I think it's always good to reinforce it with a lot of additional information. So we'll be sharing some of that with you. And then we're going to start talking a little bit about the basics of cybersecurity. We're going to try to break it down into some very understandable categories so that as we go forward, you don't feel overwhelmed, which is oftentimes the nature of the conversation when we're looking at cybersecurity. People, aren't sure how to address it or where to begin or even how to understand it. So we're going to talk about some basics, give you a basis from which to speak about these things going forward. From there, we're going to talk about the threat landscape. I like that term, but essentially what we're going to look at is, what are some of the more common threats out there? What are the, anticipated biggest cyber threats for 2019? And from there, we're going to talk about how we address all of these things we've talked about. So we're going to spend a lot of time in the early part trying to terrify you. No, not actually trying to terrify you. That's not the goal. But some of what we're going to learn is a little scary, right? But I want to put it in perspective because there are steps that any business can take to improve their cybersecurity. Some of them are simple. Some of them are very attainable, and some of them might take a little more effort. And that's where we get into the cybersecurity planning. And then we'll wrap things up with, we have 5 steps you can take right away to improve your cybersecurity situation. So we want to leave you with some good, tangible steps that you could go out and do right now without a lot of additional expertise, and hopefully have you coming out of this feeling like you have an understanding of how you might address this going forward. As we go through things, and Caitlin mentioned it here, I'd like you to ask questions in the chat window. I will be pausing periodically throughout the presentation to make sure you have an option to answer those questions. So we'll try to get them while we're talking about the information that spawned those questions. So pretty straightforward steps here. Put it in the question area, and we will check in on those as we go out through things. Next part is just if you want to download the presentation, we have it in a PDF format in the handouts section, and you can click on that and download that right during the session here to help you out. Again, we want to leave you with some good, useful information going forward. I'll ask real quick, any questions just starting out here?
We have no questions at this time.
Perfect. Great place to start.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we're going to start talking about why security is important. And again, this seems pretty obvious, but what it really boils down to for most businesses is, can you survive a cyber attack? A lot of businesses do not. And if you are able to survive it, what's the cost to your organization? Again, some of this is fairly scary information, but it's something that you need to be aware of. Going forward, you're going to have to address this more and more. It's the change and the evolution that's going on in business right now. So we're going to start by looking at some of the major cyber attack events in recent times. In the last year or two, the top three all happened in the last year or two. We put them up there. A few of these stand out because of their scope, because of their size. The Equifax breach, which impacted a large number of people. They estimate the cost of that for Equifax was in the neighborhood of $4 billion. So looking at that from even a large company like Equifax, that accounts for a substantial amount of revenue for them, and they will be recovering from that for years. Marriott, 500 million records breached. Medicare, everybody's looking for Social Security numbers for identity theft purposes, and Medicare is a great source for that. And a couple of other ones that I want to point out here. Yahoo was particularly noticeable for the scope and for the time that it took to report it. So the original Yahoo hack happened back in 2013. Some 3 or 4 years later, they acknowledged the hack in a much smaller scope and subsequently acknowledged 2 or 3 other hacks. In hindsight, looking at all these, they originated from a single hack back in 2013 with a total of 3 billion accounts taken. So this is literally the most significant attack in history and is noteworthy for that. And then I included this recent Facebook hack. I included it because it's interesting. You'll notice that it's not credit card data. It's not Social Security numbers. It's names and birth dates, employers, and search activity and check-in locations. So why is this important to hackers, and why is this relevant? And the truth is that in our evolving world, data has value. You can use this information and create databases to be able to target people for additional attacks. And we'll get into some of how that works with social engineering and some of the targeted phishing attacks that are out there these days. But it's not a direct money value that you see tied to that the hackers are going after, but there is a cost associated with it, and Facebook has had a damaged reputation because of this, and some of those costs, although intangible, can be invaluable here. So we look at this and we think, hey, these are big companies. I'm not sure how much this applies to me. I hear about it on the news. Target was breached. If I'm personally affected, that can be painful. But my business, we have 500 employees. We only are doing 10 to 20 million a year. This is not something we need to worry about. And the truth of the matter is that that is not accurate, right? So in this world, you find that small to mid-sized businesses are actually being targeted more frequently than the large corporations. So if you have a large enterprise, you invest a lot in cybersecurity. You can get the best tools, you can get the best teams, you can get everything you need to give yourself the best security posture out there. SMBs have challenges related to this, and they're very reasonable challenges, right? We have budgets that we need to be within. We don't have a limitless supply of money to spend on cybersecurity. So we do what we can, but we also neglect a lot of things. And that's why you see 67% of those attacks out there targeting small to mid-sized businesses. What's most frightening to me as we explore this is really that next bullet point about 60% of SMBs going out of business within 6 months. So we see it happen. You have a data breach, you lose data, you have a crypto locker virus that puts ransomware on your server, and you can't access your data. Maybe you can't operate for a few days. This is a major impact and hard to recover from. And so that's a statistic that I really want you to keep in mind here, because it's a real thing that a lot of companies experience, and you don't want to underestimate the severity of that. 33% of businesses require more than 3 days to recover. These are the hidden costs that people don't talk about. You might pay your ransom to get your data back, but how long were you down for? What was the cost of that? Employees sitting idle. There's a lot of intangible costs out there that people don't consider. And that brings us clearly to the last point. So this number, when I read it, seemed extremely high to me. I have seen several other numbers and statistics out there that don't show such a high number. I've seen average cost of $8,000. I've seen average cost of $30,000. I've seen average cost of 1.5 million, right? So even the 1.5 million seemed high. But when you look at it again, through the full statistics and the full impact, you have loss of reputation at the company. You have data loss that can't be replaced and needs to be somehow reproduced or created. You have employee downtime. You have an inability to deliver on your promises to your clients, right? So when you factor in a lot of these unseen costs, insurance costs, right? If you have cybersecurity insurance, it's going to go up after this. So there are a lot of intangibles. I still think that number is a little bit high, but I put it out here, and it's on purpose. We're talking about some scary stuff. We want to understand what the true severity of it could be. So although I don't think it's 100% realistic, I think it at least makes the impression that costs are high for these things. So let's talk a little bit about the overall impact of cybercrime in our world here. So ransomware costs are exceeded $5 billion in 2017. Couldn't find the 2018 data, but you can assume it's pretty close to that. This was a 15 times increase over 2015. So in 2 short years, it increased by 15 times. And again, that's a significant number, and we tell you this to show you that this is not something that's going away. This is not something that we have a solution for yet to prevent the attacks happening. There are solutions for dealing with them, and we'll get to those a little bit later. So other costs we talked about, costs and time. So lost time, lost productivity, average cost in time being 50 days. Again, I think that's a little bit high. That's going to have some extreme examples in there that are probably skewing that average. Again, global cost is up 27% in 2017. Information loss, we don't think about it. We mentioned downtime. I didn't even mention it when I was speaking about other costs here, but data loss that you can't replace, that you need to invest time to replace, that apparently covers 43% of typical costs of a cyber attack. So it's a significant thing. You want to make sure your data is protected. So we're spending more on cybercrime costs. Globally, it was $1 trillion in 2018, and we anticipate in 2021 that we're going to be reaching $6 trillion. So significant numbers. It's a growing thing, and the thought of doing nothing should certainly concern you. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we can do about it here as we come up. So certain cybersecurity facts. This top one was at the top here on purpose. I want people to be aware of this. So 92.4% of malware is delivered via email. So if you do not have a spam filter in place, or if your spam filter is ineffective, whether it's set up incorrectly, or it's an inadequate tool, or it's letting things through that other tools would catch, that needs to be addressed. That's going to be one of the primary things that you're going to want to take away from this discussion. So next point, with the 191 days to identify a data breach. So why is that? What does that mean? That means that people are having access to your system. They might be planting various Trojans or other tools, ransomware tools within your infrastructure in different places, and you're just unaware of it because you weren't made aware when the breach occurred, and that abnormal behavior has not been detected yet by whatever tools you might have in place. So this is organizations big and small. This is not just small to mid-sized businesses where they might not have the resources. Large organizations are having trouble with this too. So you want it, your key is early detection, so intrusion detection and prevention. So in the coming years, IT spend is going to be driven a lot by compliance. So we've probably all heard of the GDPR. That is the Data Protection Act that the EU put on. So it's focused in the European zone, but a lot of us do business overseas, and because of that, this will impact us from a compliance standpoint. CSSA is the California Consumer Privacy Act. That's again compliance regulation. If you're doing business in California, you're going to need to deal with that. You know, Sarbanes-Oxley, SOX compliance, PCI compliance, a lot of us are familiar with. So meeting these compliance requirements is going to be driving your IT spend over time here, and security is a big part of that. So we mentioned again, unreported costs of cyber attacks, downtime and productivity loss. You know, you might have several different security tools from several different vendors. You may have 2 people that you go to for security, or 3 or 4. The more cooks in the kitchen, the more gaps you're going to create in your security profile. The next statistic, that 95% of cybersecurity breaches due to human error. This is something I also want you to take great note of. So in our world here, if you have the best security, if you have everything in place that you need, you're doing a great job. It still all comes down to your employees, to your end users. If they're clicking on things that they shouldn't click on because they can't recognize a cyber threat, that's a huge problem for you. And this is where a lot of things originate, in the human error realm. And we have more we're going to talk about on that, and there are steps you can take to deal with that. But you know, it's an important thing to note, and I want that to stand out for you in our conversation. So the healthcare industry is highly targeted. I don't know if any of you work in the healthcare industry, but in particular, you want to have a strong security posture there. And then the United States, right? This is where most of the ransomware attacks occur. You know, globally, being almost 20% of all attacks is a huge number. So I guess we're lucky in that way. Lucky might not be the word we'd choose, but you know, it's where we're at. And then spear phishing. You may have heard the term phishing or spear phishing, and we're going to explore that as a type of attack and what that means, and you know, how you prevent those type of attacks. But essentially, spear phishing is a targeted email that's socially engineered to be a very tricky device for gaining access or information, usually from high-profile targets like CEOs or you know, other executives in a given organization. So I'd like to pause right now and see if there are any other questions that have come up.
Currently, we do not have any questions.
Excellent. So so again, you know, we're talking about a lot of scary things here, right? You know, you should reasonably be concerned about these. The majority of CEOs and other C-level executives out there, business owners, this is what they worry about at night. You know, these are things that can take all the work they've done, you know, over many years to develop a good company and a good product, and do, you know, accomplish their goals. And you know, one thing can wipe that out. So it is a frightening thing. But again, there are things that we can do about it. And I think it all starts with understanding where you're at, right? So, you know, what do I need to know about cybersecurity? What steps can I take to make some changes that are going to help me out? And so we're going to do a little cybersecurity 101 and just help you understand those risks and make sure that we're addressing some of these things so that you come out of this not terrified or worried about your business, but with some tangible steps here. And here's a question I get a lot. You know, I work in finance, or, you know, I'm in operations. You know, I don't know the first thing about cybersecurity. I don't even know where to start, right? This can be daunting. This can be daunting for cybersecurity professionals. But what we're going to do here is we're going to define some specific areas of focus so that you can break this down for planning and have specific plans for each area. We're going to talk about some of the kinds of cyber attacks that are out there, and then what the most common ways of launching those attacks are. So the idea of attack vector, how are they attacking you going forward? All right, to break it down, we start with security, talking about it in these 4 broad categories. There's actually a 5th category, which I'll mention here, but it's not as common even today for most organizations in our target audience here. But first, we're going to start with critical infrastructure. So infrastructure, you can think on a on a global state scale. It's it's roads, it's bridges, it's all that stuff. So it's the foundation that your business is based on. And from an IT standpoint, that's going to be your servers and your networks, your internet service provider. Your connection to the internet is a big part of this. A lot of you probably have redundant internet connections to ensure that that is always up and supporting your business when you need to. That's a good thing. But electrical supplies, just making sure that all these basic elements that support your security are in place, are maintained, and able to support what you're doing. So critical infrastructure is one area of focus that you want to look at. You can also look at network security. So your network is just the connected devices that you guys have. So that's going to be your servers and your workstations. It's going to be your wireless access points. It's going to be your switches and routers. It's going to be your firewall, right? So all of these are your network. This is your particular space in the IT world, right? So there's things that you want to consider with that. Obviously, perimeter security, this is something we've had around for quite a while. Firewalls, they're very important, but you support this also with good, solid policies and standard practices. You make sure that people only have access to things that they need access to. You obviously do endpoint protection. We've been doing antivirus and anti-malware for years and years now. But you also want to have an element when you're looking at network security. You want to make sure you're somehow addressing intrusion detection and prevention. So we mentioned that 191 days prior to this, before people know they've been breached. With the right tools, you can obviously mitigate that. And the sooner you know about somebody being in your network, or that there's something that shouldn't be there that's on your network, the sooner you can address it and the safer you will be. So cloud security is a big area. We are all talking about cloud. You are probably using some cloud-based applications right now. You may have infrastructure in the cloud. If some of you are GP on Azure clients, right? You're already in that Microsoft Azure cloud, right? So cloud is just, in a simple form, it's just somebody's computers elsewhere. So those might be Microsoft's computers up in Azure. They might be Amazon's computers up in AWS, Amazon Web Services, or any of 100 different data centers and data providers. But security becomes, your good security practices and planning need to be expanded to whatever you're doing in the cloud. You can't just rely on cloud providers to cover everything for you. Although Microsoft does a lot with security in the Azure cloud, there are steps and things you need to do to make sure that whatever you have in the cloud is secure. So we have cloud-based applications that you're dealing with there. You might have, for example, Microsoft Office 365. A lot of people are into. You might have, you might be using Google Docs. You might be, using any of 100 of different applications that support your business from a SaaS or software as a service model. So you want to look at those. You want to understand security in those items. You want to make sure you're taking steps to secure those applications. The good thing is that in a cloud security situation, you are backed up by artificial intelligence and machine learning. There are in Azure in particular, there's a lot of large algorithms running that are searching out and detecting anomalous behaviors and generally trying to make it a safer environment. So you have big data and artificial intelligence that's out there helping keep us safe. So that's a benefit. Usually they'll even have some sort of continuous security monitoring. And if your cloud application doesn't, you want to make sure that you're maybe utilizing a tool that does that. So cloud security is another big component of that. And then application security. So this is something that you know, a lot of people might not think about as much. Again, we assume that when we consume something from the cloud that it's safe and they're taking all the best practices, or, you know, as we're developing our own products for the cloud, you know, there are, you know, concerns and things you want to look at there. So I have this OWASP, excuse me, top 10 listed here, and this is a regular report. OWASP is Open Web Application Security Project. So this is a, you know, industry standard. They set up, you know, security tools. They talk about standards. They talk about security testing, how to develop things from a secure code development standpoint. So they're kind of the gold standard in application security. And you can go out right now. You can Google OWASP. You can look it up and get that top 10 report. And this will help you look at that angle of security here, the application security angle, and give you a lot of good ideas from that. So it's a very large area, which is why I don't have more detail here, but I would 100% defer to the OWASP top 10 for that for you guys. All right, so that's your security categories. That helps you kind of get a basis of different areas that you might want to look at in your security planning. But let's talk about specific cyber threats, or categories of cyber threats rather in this case. So it's really 3 broad categories, and these are going to sound familiar to you guys, but there's attacks on confidentiality. So the purpose of that is to go out there and get confidential information. These have been happening for a long time. We have credit cards, you know, being stolen. That could be as simple as somebody having a skimmer on a ATM and taking your credit card information that way. But they go after passwords, personal information, you know, intellectual property. So some businesses, this might not be a big concern, but you know, intellectual property has as much value as money. So you know, you need to consider that, and those are the kind of things that people will go after, looking for that private data. Attacks on integrity. So these are a little bit different. I'd say they're mostly less common. So this is sabotage. This is people going in and messing with your information and data. And this is really important to consider. This can be small changes, you know, adding a comma somewhere, doing a SQL injection attack that changes something within your SQL data. So they can be very subtle and intended to, you know, corrupt your information, you know, without an obvious attack, or they can be the whole slash and burn approach. So where they would come in and they'd just reduce your data, take your systems offline, you know, corrupt everything that they can. You don't see that as often because the obvious monetary value in a slash and burn destruction approach is not there, and most of the time these cyber criminals are motivated by money. But you will see that, as I say here, with nation state perpetrators. So understanding that in the threat landscape, there are nation states out there doing cybercrime. There are you know, criminal organizations, and there is you know, Joey down the street who happened to download some ransomware from the dark web, and he's deploying that to fund his skateboard habit. So there's a real range of cyber criminals and you know, different types of cyber attacks out there. It's not just people with specialized knowledge now. It's you know, it's the kid down the street who's downloading tools and using those to attack people. So different kind of threats out there. Sabotage is oftentimes linked more to the nation state perpetrators. And then attacks on availability, and these are what you see a lot these days because ransomware is a huge part of this. You know, we're going to prevent you from getting to your data. It's all encrypted. You got to pay us a ransom or you don't get it, right? So that's a big threat out there. And then, you know, we've all probably heard of a DDoS or a denial of services attack, and this is essentially flooding websites to shut them down so that people can't access them and get to your information. So different attacks on availability. I'm going to pause for a moment here just for questions, because I think these cyber threats and different areas of security sometimes pique interest. Any questions that have come up?
So far, there are not any other questions, but I'll
Okay.
keep an eye on the question box to see if any come in.
Great, wonderful. All right, so we have these different types of cyber threats. You know, how do they affect these attacks? So that's going to be your attack vectors. This is really important to understand. So even if you don't understand the threats that are out there, even if you don't understand what they're trying to do to you, you should understand how they're trying to get to you. Okay, so this one at the top is at the top for a reason, because this is the direction that cyber attacks are going, and this is called social engineering. So you know, can go out there and I can find the weakest link in a chain, and oftentimes it's going to be a person, right? So they got great spam filter, they got great antivirus, they got a wonderful firewall, they got all these tools in place. You know, these guys are secure until Bill gets that email that looks like it's from Facebook, and he clicks on a link and uses it to log in and inadvertently gives up that password that he's been using for 20 years, and it allows them to have access to your systems. So not to pick on Bill, it's happened to a lot of people, but you know, humans are easier to hack than your systems. So it's deceptive tactics in general to get you to click on things. It could be everything from a promotion from a store that you go to a lot. Hey, I just got a $5 coupon email from Pizza Hut. Well, why did you get that? That's kind of the question you got to start asking yourself in these things. So social engineering is a direction things are going, and you know, we got to get smarter about how we respond to that. So phishing, you've probably heard this term. You know, phishing is just sending out emails to try and trick you into giving away your personal information, right? So it's usually a broad thing with a lot of emails that go out there, and so they play the numbers game. They do a lot of emails to a large group of people, and if one person in 3,000 clicks on it, you know, they've gotten what they wanted. So it happens a lot. We get emails like this all the time. A lot of them get caught in our spam filter. Some of them don't, right? So phishing is very common. It's probably, you know, as we mentioned, with email being the #1 delivery method for these attacks of malware, phishing is instrumental in that. So I want to point out what we call spear phishing, and I think I mentioned this a little bit before. So again, that's a targeted attack on a specific individual. So we've heard stories maybe about the CEO who got the you know, urgent email from their VP. Hey, I need you to wire this to close the deal. It's urgent. This is happening right now. And the CEO just steps right up, does his job, makes sure that the wire transfer goes through so that they can seal the deal they have there. And it wasn't his VP. That money just went to the cyber criminals, and this has happened a lot. And this is why spear phishing is done. So they go out there and they do social engineered things to gather information, to learn more about these people that they want to attack. They go on to LinkedIn. They might even create a profile on LinkedIn and associate with this person. So they're getting information. They make things seem very realistic, and they send them to you to get your information. So spear phishing is going to happen more. It's continuing to happen. Couple of other things: whale phishing or whaling, right? Spear phishing attack at a high-value target. This is an interesting story about the 2008 attack, where, hey, we have a link to an FBI subpoena, right? Well, this seems urgent. It seems serious, and as you can say, a 10% success rate. That's phenomenal. These people made their money on that cyber attack. And then you might have heard some other similar terms. Vishing, that's just voice phishing. So if you're doing a phone call that's intended to mislead, hi, I'm so-and-so representing such and such, could be a recorded message, could be anything. We've all experienced that in our lives. Clone phishing, where you copy something exactly, but use it. So it might be like what looks like an internal document, but you've changed a link in it, or using it to get different information. It's again that savvy targeted attack, and snowshoeing, which is a lot of attacks that come from various vectors that are designed not to be noticed by your antivirus or your spam. So they basically stop the attack prior to when your spam filter might notice it. So those are some of the options that you look at with phishing. Additional attack vectors that need to be mentioned here. Unpatched software. This is a huge vulnerability that nearly every business has. So we all know that the #1 most neglected IT task is updates and patching, right? It's like, oh, I'll get that later, because it's time consuming, because it's something that is hard to keep up with. 5,000 to 6,000 new vulnerabilities surface every year, right? So when you got 5 line of business applications, and each of those has new vulnerabilities coming up, and they're sending out updates and patches and updates and patches, that's tough to keep up with, right? So that gets neglected. You end up being exposed and vulnerable in those situations, and exploits and attacks that could have been prevented happen just because we didn't get to patching. So unpatched software is a huge hole, but it's probably one of the most closable holes out there. So keep that one in mind as we're talking here. So social media threats. We have talked about catfishing before, people who were practically getting married to people and, having their money taken, that goes beyond just, dating, right? This is your classic con artist approach. I go out there and I create a LinkedIn profile, and I friend, 100 of your friends in your network, right? That makes us a close connection. I reach out to you, start asking questions about your business. I seem to be knowledgeable. I'm talking about, what's going on with this other person that we know in common, right? I create this very believable persona, and suddenly you're revealing things to me that you wouldn't normally reveal. It's in our natures to trust people, and that's not a bad thing, but criminals take advantage of that. And then I want to highlight this one as well, because it's a little harder to address. It's something to be aware of. They're less common, these attacks, but it's very, they're the most nefarious, right? So an advanced persistent threat. So like we say, a sophisticated attack vector in which intruders establish a long-term presence on a network. So this is somebody gaining access to your network, planting different tools within your network, using them over time. They don't try to do anything necessarily obvious until they're ready to do it, right? And they might just be gathering information. They might just be watching what you're doing, but it's really a sustained cyber attack over time, as opposed to an isolated event, which a lot of these other attacks are. So advanced persistent threats, they're manually executed. Like I said, it's closer to classic espionage. So, they'll plant Trojans, they'll set up backdoors in your system. I think we mentioned SQL injection attacks before, but they're essentially trying to get tools into your network and keep it compromised over time in order to take advantage of what you're doing. I'll pause real quick here to see if there's any questions about attack vectors.
There are no questions at this time.
Great. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the threat landscape. What do things look like out there? You know, what do I really need to be worried about? You know, what are the biggest risks? So it's a constantly evolving landscape, right? There's new things being developed. There's new strategies. The criminals get smarter. The criminals get better, right? So we want to talk about what you need to be aware of going into 2019. So some of the top threats that you're going to get to, we've spoken about already. Spear phishing, targeted phishing attacks. It's really effective and there's a big payoff. So that's the kind of thing that the criminals will be doing in great numbers and in increasing numbers. Socially engineered attacks, again, we talked about this. So we're getting better at recognizing these threats. Nobody here would fall for a fax from a Nigerian prince like they might have 20 or 30 years ago, right? That's not going to happen anymore. We're better at recognizing these things. But as we get better, the criminals also get better. So they're improving what they do. They are getting smarter about how they approach it. And again, you know, humans, we're the weakest link in that security chain most of the time. So they are going to continue to focus on trying to dupe us, on trying to take advantage of us, because, you know, we don't get to default to, you know, some sort of artificial intelligence that, you know, knows more and does more than average human brain can do, on some days at least. So ransomware, we know that's a big threat. It's been out there a while. It's continuing to grow, and it's something that both large enterprises and small to mid-sized businesses need to worry about. We'll talk a little bit coming up here about, you know, how do you handle a ransomware attack, and make sure that you understand, you know, that there are ways to deal with that are effective. And the most effective thing to do, frankly, is never, ever, ever, ever pay a ransomware ransom. And the reason I say that is, you know, hedged in some things. There are times where you have to, right? If you have not planned effectively, if it's the difference between operating your business going forward or going out of business, that ransom is not as onerous as you would think it would be. But here's the key. Pay the ransom once, expect to get attacked again and again and again. You know, it encourages them, it keeps them funded, it keeps the cyber criminals out there winning. And the real key thing I want you to understand is that if they send you the decryption keys and you decrypt your information, unless you find it, their ransomware is still on your system. If they are not, this is hard to say, reputable criminals, they can re-encrypt you, right? And they can extort you for even more. Look how easily and quickly they paid. I'm gonna get more from this target, right? So please, if at all possible, don't pay ransomware. And then the last one there, cryptojacking. This one was interesting to me because this was new to me this year. It's all about hijacking your computer to mine cryptocurrency. So if any of you are familiar with Bitcoin or some of the other cryptocurrencies out there, you can mine it, and you mine it through having computers do these calculations that over time generate Bitcoins and other cyber or cryptocurrency. So now cyber criminals will go into your computer and set it up to execute these functions, right, and generate Bitcoin for them, which it's an interesting attack vector. And you know, in some ways, it might be less harmful to your organization, other than taking resources from you and otherwise, you know, eliminating what you can do here. All right. I'm going to go into cybersecurity planning here, and I think we're getting a little bit short for time, so I'm going to try to move this up a little bit more. But a key point to make here is, does your IT strategy align with your business strategy? We're all out there spending a lot of time making sure we have a good, sound business strategy, that we know what we're doing 1 year, 2 year, 5 years into the future, right? So we put a lot of time and effort into that. And if you are not including an IT strategy in concert with that, you're exposing yourself to some risk. So when we look at it in cybersecurity planning, we talk about things like there's no silver bullet. So we need to look out there and we need to have a lot of tools in place to make sure that we're solving the problem here. So we address this through a layered approach, right? So you'll have several different layers of security, and we'll talk about those. And then we talk about security planning. And you want to do security planning, but you also want to check on yourself. You want to make sure, hey, we have a good security in place. 6 months from now, we want to check it again and make sure if it's still a good security solution, right? So we want to check these things, and we want to make sure that our enterprise is able to continue going forward. So here's the layered approach to cybersecurity, and a lot of this will make sense to people because we do a lot of this. So you'll have a perimeter defense. That's again your firewall. That's kind of your first line of defense, and it's going to deal with a lot of threats for you, right? But you want to make sure that you don't use a consumer grade firewall from Best Buy. You want an enterprise grade firewall that is backed up by a security subscription and a support subscription, so that you always have the latest, most up-to-date security in place. Obviously, you're going to have some endpoint protection. Again, this is your antivirus, your anti-malware. You want to make sure that you're not necessarily using like freeware for that. You know, freeware antivirus is better than nothing, but if you really want to make sure that you're in the best situation, you do a subscription to a enterprise grade antivirus, anti-malware, and you make sure that that's getting regular updates and that it's always giving you the best security that you can have. Spam filtering, we talked about it. You don't want emails getting through. And then in addition to that, you want to probably look at some sort of security monitoring tool. So we talked about detecting when the cyber criminals have breached your network. You want to know when that happens, and you want to be able to take steps to solve it. I apologize, I'm going to take a quick drink of water here, because apparently I'm exceeding my talking quota. All right, and then this security awareness training. So we keep talking about humans as the weakest link in this plan here, and that's something that can be addressed. It can be addressed through something called security awareness training. This is nothing new. There are several programs out there. There are programs that can be delivered to make sure that not only are your people educated, but that's an ongoing education. And so you keep your humans essentially as up to date and patched as possible as well with something like security awareness training. It's a very important thing to consider. And this isn't strictly part of your security apparatus, but backups are key. So the only way to recover from a ransomware attack is to have a good, viable backup prior to the point of infection that you can restore, so that you can continue operation. And this is critical to any security planning. So I included it here, even though it's not specifically part of it. Additional planning here that we can do. You should check on yourself. You should make sure your security is up to date with quarterly, biannually, annual security assessments. You want to have people doing penetration testing, other security scans. You want to review your group policies, assess your physical hardware. Is it secured? So these are things that can be tough to do as a business, but what you want to do is you want to partner with people out there to help them with that. Consistent group policies, enforced password policy. If your passwords are the same they've been for the last year, you're more at risk than everyone else. And then you only give employees access to the actual systems they need. So you want to control that access. That's a surefire way to just limit potential issues, right? If somebody's compromised, they don't have access to the entire system, you're at less risk. And then related to the backups, you want to do some disaster recovery planning. So it's not just about preventing the attacks and making sure they don't happen. It's also making sure you know what to do if you are compromised. So it's planning that you want to have in place as part of your security planning, and more of an investment in time than it is an investment in resources. All right, I'm not going to pause for questions right now because I know we're getting towards the end, but I'm going to ask what now, right? So we've gone over a lot of stuff. We've scared ourselves. We've talked about the basics of cybersecurity and understanding it. We've talked about planning and some steps that we can take. But what I want to leave you with is 5 immediate steps that you can take to make your enterprise more secure. And looking at these, we talked about it in the presentation. Ensure your patches are up to date. It's the most solvable cybersecurity issue out there. If you are having trouble doing this, there are people you can partner with, and there are tools that they might have that you might not be able to afford to automate updates and patches to ensure that it's happening on a regular basis. This is an easy way to make yourself more secure. You want to secure your Wi-Fi network. If you don't have a guest Wi-Fi and a regular Wi-Fi network, you are creating risk for yourself. Your vendors come in, hey, can I just get access to your Wi-Fi so I can do my presentation for you? You just created risk for yourself. So take care of that. Finally, I would control physical access to your servers and other network hardware. That means that your server shouldn't be under the CFO's desk, right? They should be in a secured, locked room. If you can do that, you've made yourself more secure, because it's not something that anybody can walk up to, slip a USB drive into, and compromise you. And then we talked about passwords, right? So we want to make sure that you're doing those changes to those at least every 90 days. That's pretty standard. And that, there's requirements where you can't, duplicate the same password, every other time, where, you have, different requirements for letters, numbers, things like that. So a good password policy will help you out. And then we talked about backups and how important they are. This is your key to surviving a ransomware attack. Make sure those are working, and not just that, make sure that you can actually restore them. A backup, as good as it can be, is useless to you if you can't restore from it. And then I have a bonus recommendation in here that we didn't talk about, but it's commonly available out there now, and it's called two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. So the idea behind this is that you have 2 steps that you need to do to authenticate. So the first step can be your password and your login, and then whatever service you're using or your own network might ask you to put in a code that you receive on your cell phone, right? So they know this is your cell phone number. They send that code there. You receive it on your phone, you put it in, and then you have access to your network. Multi-factor authentication puts a few other elements in there, and again, it just ensures that the people logging in are the people who should be logging in. So if that's not something that you're aware of and that's something you want to explore, please find a partner and talk about that. So I am a little bit over time, but I want to thank everybody. I really enjoyed being able to share this with you. I think it's exciting stuff. It isn't something you don't need to be worried about, but it is something that you absolutely can improve, and it isn't necessarily costly to do it. I mean, too costly, right? There's always a cost associated with being more secure, but some simple steps can get you there without interrupting your entire business. So thank you again for your time. And if there are any questions at this point, I mean, I'm available.
All right. Great presentation, Kevin. Thank you for cover all things cybersecurity for GP. All right, it looks like there aren't any other questions in the Q&A.
All right.
I'll hold a minute here just for any potential lasting questions.
And if questions do occur to you, again, you can download the presentation. I have my contact info in here. Reach out to me. I'm happy to answer any questions that occur to you afterwards.
All right. Thanks a lot, Kevin. Thanks everyone for joining. All right, have a good afternoon.